Defensive stratagems. Defensive stratagems are some of our greatest force multipliers, and are the closest thing we have to non-Helldiver allies on the battlefield. And speaking of which, Arrowhead, please listen. Please give us SEAF troopers in missions. I'll give you anything. My firstborn son, or maybe even my super credits. Just please make my dreams a reality. Today, we're going to be ranking every single defensive stratagem in Helldivers 2. To keep things simple, I'll be ranking them in the order that they appear in the ship management menu. But beware, these are my opinions, and if you disagree, you can make your own tier list with the template I made on tiermaker.com. And with that out of the way, let's get on to the rankings. We're going to start off at the bridge, and our first stratagem is the EMG-101 HMG emplacement, a manned gun emplacement offering superior firepower against lightly armored targets. Slow to turn, so place it wisely. The HMG emplacement is, without a doubt, one of the most fun stratagems in the entire game. Who doesn't want to hop on a massive turret and gun down hordes of enemies? The description is actually quite inaccurate these days, because it can penetrate heavy armor. It also turns much faster now than it did at launch. And while you, of course, want to place it in a good spot, the turning rate isn't the deal breaker that it used to be. So the description is a bit outdated. All I have to say about this one is, if you haven't gotten the chance to try this one out, then just go for it. It's really, really fun. You can also find it on defense missions, the evacuate high-value asset missions. You can find them already there, in case you just want to try it out without actually getting it for yourself first. I love this thing a lot, so I'm putting it in S tier. I'm just gonna say it. This is so fun, and it's actually really, really good. So I'm putting it S tier. Next up is the FX-12 Shield Generator Relay, a stationary energy shield which provides cover against projectiles. Has a limited lifetime once deployed. The Shield Generator Relay was pretty useless at one point, but after the 60-day balancing plan from last year, it has become a great choice for a purely defensive stratagem. It surrounds an area in a protective bubble shield, kind of like the bubble shield from Halo, but this one only blocks projectiles from the outside, meaning that you can actually shoot enemies outside of the shield while you're still inside of the shield. It's best against bots, of course, because they use the most projectiles of any faction by far, currently. It's mostly ineffective against bugs, except for blocking bile. And it's not very effective against the current Illuminate forces, since the voteless make up for a substantial portion of their units right now. In fact, most of their units in any given mission will be just voteless. And so while I think it's pretty good and a unique choice for a lot of missions, I'm gonna put it in B tier. It's really good when it works. It's really good against bots, or against any projectile enemies for that matter, but right now, there's only one faction where this will be consistently useful all the time. And so it's a B tier, in my opinion. Next up is the ARC-3 Tesla Tower, a turret which fires electrical charges at targets in close range. To avoid friendly fire, remain prone. The Tesla Tower isn't one of my favorites, I'll just be honest, but I can still recognize the value that it can bring to certain missions. It's especially good on the high-value asset missions, where you can cover a whole choke point of enemies with a single Tesla Tower. It's also good in urban environments, where you can again cover a whole choke point with it, so you can block off an entire street and prevent bots or bugs or whoever from being able to advance. It's best against bugs for sure, because they're easy to manipulate into walking into the tower, because so many of them are melee enemies. I think the actual biggest problem I have with it, though, is how often it will kill teammates. Sometimes a rogue arc of lightning will just chain from enemy to a friend, which can often kill them instantly. So you need to be very careful around these things, and plus you need to know when and how to use them. If you do know when and how to use them, they're pretty effective, but I overall think that they're not what I would take as a sentry. So I'm gonna have to put this in C tier. I'm willing to say that it is useful, but I just don't like it, and I don't think it's always that good. Now, we're moving on to the engineering bay, with the MD6 anti-personnel minefield. Deploys a defensive anti-personnel minefield to halt the enemy advance. The anti-personnel minefield is exactly what you think it is. It's a minefield. It's simply very average and is a decent pick for basically any mission. Mines in general, I think, are actually kind of underrated. They don't get used as much as they really should, and they can cover a very sizable area and halt an enemy's advance in its tracks. These are the most basic out of all the different kinds of mines, so I'll be using these as a base, like a barometer to grade the other mines on. So for that reason, I'm putting it B tier, above the shield generator relay. It is useful on more missions. Next up is the MDI-4 Incendiary Mines. Deploys a defensive incendiary minefield, which will set both terrain and targets alight when triggered. The incendiary mines are incredibly good at holding back a wave of enemies, because not only do they of course explode and deal damage and kill enemies, they leave behind fire for anyone that happened to be following them. This is of course excellent against bugs and voteless, and it's not that bad against bots either. You can use these at extraction, or at objectives, or simply at any choke point to effectively hold off a horde of enemies for a pretty long time. The only real drawback is that the mine explosions themselves do much less damage when compared to the anti-personnel minefield, but I would say that's a worthy trade for incendiary capabilities. So I'm going to put these in A tier. I think that they're my favorite mines in the game in most scenarios, so I think they're pretty good, and they can be used against pretty much anyone in the game. I think they're quite good, actually. Next up is the MD-17 Anti-Tank Mines. Scatters powerful anti-tank mines that deal heavy, armor-penetrating damage. Minefield is less densely packed relative to smaller mines. So first things first, the description for the anti-tank mines isn't completely accurate anymore. They now only trigger when heavy enemies walk over them, and this is a key part of understanding this stratagem, because it won't stop a horde of small bugs or voteless or smaller bots or any smaller enemies. This does nothing to them directly. But this also can be a good thing at times, because Helldivers do not trigger these mines either. So as long as you know what they look like, they are not a threat to you, and you can actually outmaneuver larger enemies by moving into this minefield and luring them into it pretty easily. And once you actually manage to get enemies to walk into it, this minefield can deal immense damage to the right enemies. A single mine does as much as an expendable anti-tank. And when you put that into perspective, that is a crazy amount of anti-tank damage. These obviously won't work all the time, but when they do, they are extremely effective. I kind of want to put it in A tier because I really like it a lot. You know what? I'll put it in A tier. I think the only way that they suffer is against the Illuminate, because they only have one heavy enemy right now. Once the Illuminate have a wider range of enemies, they'll be even better. Next up, we have the MD-8 Gas Mines. Deploys mines that release gas on activation, temporarily blinding and slowing most enemies. The gas mines are the newest kind of mines that we've gotten our hands on, and they're not too bad, but they can leave something to be desired, in my opinion. When I use a minefield, I want that area to be completely unusable until the mines are gone. But the gas mines don't really pull that off. Gas won't make the area unlivable like fire will, but it will serve to confuse enemies and make them attack one another. This combines well with the duration and radius of each mine. The entire minefield can blanket an area for a very long amount of time. If you're looking for just coverage and crowd control instead of pure damage, the gas mines are a pretty good pick. But personally, I don't like them all that much, so I think I'm going to put them in either like a low C tier or low B tier. I feel like I'll do a high C tier because I think they're better than the Tesla Towers. I would personally rather use them over Tesla Towers, but they're my least favorite mines, so I'm gonna put them there. Now we're gonna move on to the Robotics Workshop, starting off with the AMG-43 Machine Gun Sentry. An agile, automated machine gun turret will fire at targets even if Helldivers will be caught in the crossfire. and that's all they have to say about it, I guess. The Machine Gun Sentry is the most basic sentry there is, but that doesn't make it bad. It's actually very versatile. It turns quickly, deals good damage, penetrates medium armor, and has the shortest cooldown of any sentry by far. only 90 seconds by default, and that can be decreased with upgrades to your ship. Now, it does suffer in terms of damage when compared to basically every other sentry, but the positives definitely make up for that fact. You can't really go wrong with this one. It's useful against every faction and could be used on any difficulty. So I'm going to put the machine gun in like a lower A tier. I think that it's really versatile. The short cooldown makes it so that it's always going to give you some extra firepower, but it's not a lot of firepower. So it's like a little bonus you always have with you. Next up is the AG-16 Gatling Sentry, an automated turret with an extremely high rate of fire. Caution, does not check if friendly units are in line of fire. Again, that's good to know. The Gatling Sentry is simply a more devastating version of the machine gun sentry. It fires the exact same ammo as the machine gun sentry, but it has a better fire rate and a vastly increased ammo capacity. When you compare the two, it seems like the Gatling Sentry is downright better, but there are some key differences. The Gatling Sentry has a longer cooldown, which is a fair trade of course, but the Gatling Sentry also has to spool up before it can fire, which, off topic, is just a pet peeve of mine. Miniguns in real life spool up pretty much instantly, but whatever. Essentially, it's just an improved machine gun sentry with a longer cooldown. I would actually put this a little bit above the machine gun sentry in A tier. I think it's a decent spot for them. I think that they belong together, more or less, because the cooldown on the machine gun sentry just makes it so damn useful, so damn versatile. Next up, we have the M12 Mortar Sentry, a turret firing powerful shells in a high arc, effective at long ranges, and able to strike targets behind cover. The Mortar Sentry is a great idea on paper, but when you actually use it in-game, it's going to be hurting your team way too often. Think about all the times you've played Helldivers and been within melee range of an enemy, and not by your own choice. The Mortar Sentry will make that situation into a guaranteed loss, because the blast will kill you. And that's why I give it credit, because it does damn good damage, but the problem is, it's just gonna kill you. So you don't want to use this against the bugs or the Illuminate. That's fair enough. There are some stratagems that are only good against a single faction, but even though it's better against bots, you better keep your head on a swivel and never get into close range at all. The Mortar Sentry will kill you faster than your enemies will. If you take the Mortar Sentries into a bug mission, stop it. Please, just stop it. And just out of pure spite, I'm putting this in D tier. I don't care. I hate this thing. I think that it's really cool in concept. If it could not target anywhere near me, then I would think it's amazing, but it does do that. So I hate it. Next up is the AC-8 Autocannon Sentry, an automated cannon turret firing anti-tank ammunition over long ranges. Sacrifices agility for range and power. The Autocannon Sentry is one of the most powerful defensive stratagems in the game, but that does come with some drawbacks, so we'll start with the positives. It is extremely deadly, much more deadly than the handheld autocannon support weapon. It has basic anti-tank penetration, meaning that it can deal damage to just about any enemy in the game, really. It also deals some area of effect damage, which is a great little bonus. The biggest problem with it is definitely the turn rate. It is tied for the slowest turn rate among sentries in the game, and this can really cripple it in certain scenarios. So you need to place it in areas that are difficult to attack, like on higher ground or at the end of a choke point where enemies have trouble getting to it. The point is, be careful when you use it, because it can be outflanked and destroyed quite easily by some enemies. I'm putting the Autocannon Sentry in S tier. This thing just shreds. Again, if you know how to use this thing, it can just destroy enemies at insane ranges, again with anti-tank rounds. That's value. That's a lot of value. Next up, we have the AMLS-4X Rocket Sentry, a powerful automated turret, effective against armored targets. This turret will primarily aim at larger enemies. The Rocket Sentry has become one of my personal favorites in the past few months. It's really an incredible pick, and is effective against every faction in the game. It's quite comparable to the Autocannon Sentry, with a few differences that make each of them stand out. Let's focus on the projectile itself first. The 70mm rocket has basic anti-tank capabilities, so direct hits will deal damage to almost anything. Anti-tank rockets that automatically fire from a sentry, that's pretty good. On top of that, each rocket deals great damage and has an area of effect. The area of effect damage isn't anything crazy, but it's a great bonus to what you already get. The ammo capacity is surprisingly larger than the autocannon sentry, but with a slower fire rate, which isn't really a problem when you consider the power of each rocket. The major downside to the rocket sentry is the same as the autocannon sentry. They share the same slow turn speed, meaning that you must be careful where you place it. And one more thing, don't forget that the rocket sentry has backblast. Don't be standing near it when it's firing. The rocket sentry, in my opinion, is an S tier in the same boat as the autocannon sentry. I would put it above, actually. I prefer having more ammo and a slower fire rate because it makes it last longer, and the damage per shot means that you're not going to end up missing that fire rate too much. Next up, we have the M23 EMS Mortar Sentry, a turret firing static field generators that slow down the advance of enemies. The EMS mortar is pretty self-explanatory. It sends out mortar shells that stun and slow enemies, so it's a great alternative to things like the orbital EMS strike or stun grenades. In my opinion, it's the best way to stun and slow enemies. It automatically targets enemies and can shoot over things like hills and walls, just like a mortar should. It's also the best mortar, in my opinion, out of the two of them that exist, simply because it doesn't kill your teammates. It's a very liberating feeling to get hit by a mortar that doesn't kill you. The EMS mortar is good on every single difficulty and against every faction. It can save your life and cripple enemy forces if you place it right. The biggest drawback, of course, is the lack of any damage, so you need to be ready to act on the stun when it lands. This one has warmed up in me quite a bit, so I'm gonna put it in like a B tier. I like it now. I just gotta recognize the fact that it doesn't do damage. It is protective. It's defensive. It's a good defensive stratagem, but it's not a damaging one. So I'm putting it next to like the shield gen relay. I feel like that's fair. Now we're gonna move on to Urban Legends with the EAT-12 anti-tank emplacement, a powerful manned gun emplacement capable of taking out armored targets at long ranges. The anti-tank emplacement, or as it's better known, the lawn chair, can be an incredibly effective piece of equipment in the right hands. It deals immense damage to anything it can hit, and it is of course anti-tank, so it can deal damage to almost anything in the game. It excels at destroying buildings from long range, as you can see in this footage. You can drop into a blitz mission against bots and finish your objective within a minute, and it can even destroy command bunkers too, making it invaluable for taking out all kinds of enemy structures and objectives. Of course, it won't always be useful though. If your view is obstructed in any way, then obviously it won't do much, or if you're being flanked, then this thing is pretty much useless, and it becomes useless very fast in that scenario. It takes a very long time for it to turn around. So it's best when you're in a safe position and don't need to make major adjustments quickly. It's great on defensive missions, but don't expect it to be perfect in a heated firefight. In fact, it's not going to be that good at all in that situation. So the anti-tank emplacement is unrivaled in certain scenarios, like destroying buildings from long range, or just laying into a factory strider or a battle titan from across the map. But that's not like a common thing. It's just not always good. So I'm putting it in like bottom of B tier for now, because it is really good when it's good, but it's usually not. And last but not quite least, the A-Flam 40 Flame Sentry, an automated flamethrower turret. Warning: fuel canister prone to explosion when ruptured. The Flame Sentry is a sentry that shoots out flames. Not much else you need to know about it, really. It has an extremely short range for a sentry, only like 10 meters or so it's best against enemies that need to get up close and personal. So obviously, it works best against bugs and other melee enemies. You also need to be very careful around it, considering that it will be lighting the ground and anything around it on fire. Also, I can't confirm this, but it doesn't seem to have more health than the other sentries, and if it doesn't, then it really should, because it can't target anything beyond a few meters, and sentries typically have very low health. I'm not a massive fan of this one. It doesn't do the things that I want sentries to do, really. But if you want more fire, then you can't go wrong with this. I'll give you that much. I'll put it like around there. Yeah, low C tier. I think it's pretty bad. I just don't like it. I'm sure that people like it somewhere in the world. I'm just not one of them. And I think I'm pretty happy with these. I mean, machine gun sentry and Gatling sentry, in my opinion, are pretty interchangeable. Anti-tank mines, I might move these down to there, actually. They're not quite as versatile. They certainly aren't. I just like them a lot. I'm pretty happy with the rest of this. The HMG emplacement is so damn fun, and it's really good, so I'm keeping that at the very top. And the mortar sentry, sucks my dick. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have for the rankings. If you have watched this far, then please leave a like on the video. It helps me out quite a bit. And also subscribe if you want to watch more videos on Helldivers 2 and other co-op games. Comment down below about your favorite defensive stratagems. Or if you disagree with me, then tell me about how wrong I am, because I can be wrong. I read all of my comments, and I like to engage with them. I like the Helldivers community, and I'm always willing to have a fun conversation about our favorite stratagems, weapons, and whatever. More videos are going to be coming soon, I promise that. And yeah, that's all I have for today, so this is the SES Prophet of Dawn, signing off.